Do you know who my father is? He owns half this city. This woman can sleep in a park for all I care. Court dismissed. Oh, wait, that's your job, old man. That is what he said. Right here, in my courtroom, in front of everyone. I have been a judge in Providence for a long time. I have seen arrogance walk through that door before, but this young man, this 26-year-old in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, he looked at a 63-year-old widow and said those words like they meant nothing. They meant everything to me. My name is Judge Frank Caprio. This is Providence Municipal Court, and I want you to understand something before we even begin. Every single person who walks through that door gets the same justice. I do not care how much money you have. I do not care what your last name is. In this room, we are all equal. I looked at that young man. Then I looked at her, Margaret Ellison, 63 years old, gray hair pulled back neat, hands folded in her lap. She was not crying, but her eyes told a story that broke my heart a little. She had taught third grade for 31 years. 31 years of wiping little noses and teaching children to read and believe in themselves. And now she was sitting in my courtroom because someone wanted to take her home away. If you believe justice should be equal for everyone, rich or poor, young or old, you are going to want to stay right here. Because what happens next in this case is something I will never forget. Let me take you back to the beginning. Bailiff Marcus called the case number 2026 CV 04817. The matter of Harrington Properties versus Margaret Ellison, unlawful occupancy and eviction proceedings. I looked at the file, then I looked up. Margaret came to the plaintiff's table first. She walked slowly. She had a small folder with her, just a few papers held together with a rubber band. No lawyer, no assistant, just herself and those papers and 31 years of doing things the right way. I greeted her warmly. Good morning, Mrs. Ellison. Are you comfortable? Do you need anything before we begin? She smiled at me, a soft, tired smile. No, thank you, Your Honor. I just want to tell my side. I told her she would have every chance to do that. Then the other side walked in. His name was Preston Harrington III. That is what his lawyer called him, the Third. Like that was supposed to mean something to me. Preston was 26 years old. He wore a dark navy suit, sharp at the shoulders, gold cufflinks. That means the little buttons on his sleeves were solid gold. His shoes were so polished I could probably see my reflection in them. He had 2 lawyers with him, 2, for an eviction case in municipal court. He barely looked at Margaret when he sat down. He glanced around the courtroom like he was bored, like this was an inconvenience, like she was an inconvenience. One of his lawyers, a sharp-faced woman named Dorinda Crew, stood up immediately. Your Honor, this matter is quite simple. My client owns the property at 114 Larkspur Lane. The lease expired 47 days ago. Mrs. Ellison has refused to vacate. We are simply asking the court to enforce the law. I nodded. I told her I understood the claim. Then I turned to Margaret. Mrs. Ellison, how long have you lived at that address? She straightened just a little. 22 years, Your Honor. My husband Gerald and I moved in when our daughter was just starting school. Gerald passed 4 years ago. Heart attack. It was very sudden. The room went quiet for a moment. I let it. And did you have any communication with the property owner about renewing your lease? She opened her folder carefully. Her hands were steady. Yes, Your Honor. I have letters here. I wrote to the management office 6 months before the lease ended. I asked about renewal. I received a letter back, signed, that said my renewal was being processed and I should continue my payments as normal. So I did. Every month, on time. I have every receipt. She slid the papers toward me. I looked at them carefully. The letter was real. The signature was real. The receipts were real. I looked at Preston. He was checking his phone under the table. Mr. Harrington. I said his name clearly. He looked up slowly, like I had interrupted something important. I am speaking, I said. You will put the phone away. His lawyer touched his arm. He set the phone down, but the look on his face, the slight smile, the raised eyebrow, told me he thought this was amusing. The gallery behind him shifted. I could feel it. People do not like that look. I have been doing this long enough to know when someone walks in wearing that look, the truth is usually hiding close by. Before I continue, I want you to do something. If you are watching this and you are feeling what I was feeling in that moment, that slow, quiet burn of seeing someone treat a good person like she is worthless, drop a like right now. Join the thousands of people who come here because they believe in real justice, and share this. Someone in your life needs to see this story. I promise you, what comes next is going to hit hard. So, I had Margaret's letter, I had her receipts, but Preston's lawyer, Dorinda Crew, stood back up. Your Honor, that letter was sent in error by a junior staff member who had no authority to promise renewal. The owner, Mr. Harrington, made a business decision to renovate the property and list it at a higher market rate. Mrs. Ellison was given proper notice. I asked Margaret about the notice. The notice came 31 days ago, Your Honor. Slipped under my door on a Saturday morning. I was supposed to be out in 30 days. I had nowhere to go. I looked at that notice. I looked at the timeline. Something did not add up. I introduced this as Evidence 1, the letter promising renewal, the payment receipts, and the eviction notice, all dated, all documented, all telling a story very different from what Preston's lawyers were saying. I asked Dorinda a direct question. Counselor, when your client purchased this property, was he aware of the existing tenants and their leases? She hesitated. He was aware, Your Honor. However, thank you, I said. Please answer only what I asked. Preston's jaw tightened just slightly. I noticed. Then he leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. She nodded once. Then she stood again. Your Honor, Mr. Harrington would like to make a statement. I told her client could speak when spoken to. That is when Preston decided to speak anyway. Look, with all due respect, my father's company has been a top donor to city development for 15 years. I don't think it's in anyone's interest to make this difficult. We're prepared to offer Mrs. Ellison a fair relocation payment and move on. But if this court wants to make it complicated, there are people who will hear about it. The gallery went absolutely still. I took a slow breath. I let the silence sit in the room for a few seconds. Then I looked at Preston Harrington III very directly. Mr. Harrington, are you attempting to suggest that the financial history of your family has a bearing on how this court operates? He tilted his head like he was considering it. I'm just saying it's worth considering the bigger picture. I wrote something down on my notepad. He did not know what it was. I will tell you later. Then Margaret raised her hand gently. Your Honor, may I add something? I told her, of course. I received a text message 2 weeks ago from a number that matches the property management company. It said, and I wrote it down exactly, it said, if you contact any legal aid office or news station, we will pursue you for back fees and damages. Keep this quiet and the payment offer stays on the table. She slid the paper over. I looked at it. Evidence 2, a written threat, designed to scare a 63-year-old woman into silence. Preston's second lawyer, a younger man who had been quiet until now, stood up fast. Your Honor, that message was sent without the client's knowledge. It was a miscommunication by... Sit down, I said, calmly, clearly. He sat down. I looked at Preston. His expression had shifted. The bored confidence was still there mostly, but around the edges, something else was starting to show. I asked Margaret one more question. Mrs. Ellison, do you have anyone who can speak to your time in this community, your standing, your history? She nodded. She pointed toward the back of the courtroom. 4 people were sitting quietly in the gallery. She had not mentioned them before. 2 of them were adults. 2 were children, maybe 9 and 11 years old, dressed in their school clothes, sitting up straight. One of the adults stood, a woman in her 40s. Your Honor, my name is Camille Reyes. Mrs. Ellison was my 3rd-grade teacher. She is the reason I finished school. She is the reason I became a nurse. When my mother got sick, Mrs. Ellison drove me to the hospital after school every Tuesday for 3 months, so I would not miss class. She never told anyone. She just did it. The room was very quiet. Then Camille held up a notebook. I reached out to her former students on a neighborhood group when I heard what was happening. In 72 hours, 412 people responded. Every single one of them had a story like mine. That was evidence 3, not a receipt, not a legal document. 412 voices saying, "This woman matters now." I want you to hear what Preston Harrington III said next, because this is the moment. This is the moment that I have carried with me since that day. He looked at Camille. He looked at the 2 children sitting quietly in the back row. He looked at Margaret. And then, slowly, like he was completely unbothered, he said this: "I respect the sentiment, really, but sentiment doesn't pay property taxes. She had her run. 30 years of doing something nice. That's sweet. But the city is growing, and people who can't afford to grow with it need to find somewhere else to be. That's not cruel. That's economics. And economics doesn't care about your feelings." 10 seconds. That is how long the silence lasted. 10 full seconds where no one in that courtroom made a single sound. Then someone in the gallery, I do not know who, said quietly, "Oh my God," and the room came alive. I raised my hand once, and the noise settled, but I felt something change in my chest, not anger exactly, something more like resolve. That is the word, resolve. A firm, unmoving decision about what needed to happen next. I looked at Preston Harrington III. I folded my hands on my desk, and I began. "Mr. Harrington, I am going to say your name a few times today, not to embarrass you, but because I want to make sure that you are fully present for what I am about to tell you. Preston, you came into this courtroom today with 2 lawyers, a gold watch, and what I can only describe as a complete indifference to another human being's life. You told me your family's donations were worth considering. You had your management company threaten a 63-year-old widow into silence. And then, when 400 people stood up to say that this woman changed their lives, you told us that economics doesn't care about feelings. I have a question for you, Preston. Did you ever have a teacher who believed in you, someone who stayed late, someone who noticed when you were struggling and did not walk past you? Because Margaret Ellison was that person for 400 children in this city, 400 people who are now nurses and parents and teachers themselves. She did not do that for economics. She did it because she believed every child in front of her was worth the effort. Every single one, even the ones who were difficult. You said she had a run, 30 years of doing something nice. Preston, 30 years of shaping human beings is not something nice. It is one of the most important things a person can do with their life. And you reduced it, in one sentence, to sentiment that doesn't pay property taxes. Let me tell you what I see when I look at this case. I see a letter signed by your company promising renewal. I see receipts proving every payment was made on time. I see a threat sent to intimidate a woman out of her legal rights. And I see a young man who has had so much given to him that he has forgotten the difference between what he owns and what he deserves. You do not deserve to win this case, Preston. And more than that, you're not going to. Wait, I need to pause right here because this is the moment everything turns. But before I give you the ruling, I want to say this. If this story is doing something to you right now, if you feel the weight of it, subscribe right now, because this court has more cases like this one, and every single person in that gallery deserves to have their story heard by as many people as possible. Subscribe and make sure you never miss what happens next. Here is what I ruled. First, the eviction, dismissed completely. The letter Margaret received constituted a legal renewal agreement, legally binding. That means it was a real contract that had to be honored. Margaret Ellison had the right to remain in her home. Second, financial damages. Preston Harrington III was ordered to pay Margaret Ellison $14,000 in documented emotional distress damages, relocation preparation costs she had already incurred, and legal fees she could not afford because she came to court alone. Third, the threat. I referred the text message threatening Margaret to the city attorney's office for review of potential tenant intimidation violations. That means real lawyers would look at whether a law was broken. The note I had written on my pad earlier, that referral recommendation. I wrote it the moment he mentioned his father's donors. Fourth, and this is the part I put the most thought into, I ordered Preston Harrington III to complete 120 hours of community service. Not picking up trash, not writing a check. I ordered him to serve as a classroom volunteer aide at Delmore Elementary School, the same school where Margaret Ellison spent most of her career. He was to report there every Saturday morning for 6 months, under the direct supervision of the current third-grade teacher. He was not permitted to bring his phone. He was not permitted to send a substitute. He was to sit in a small chair, help children sound out words, and be present in the same way that Margaret had been present for 31 years. His lawyer stood up to object. "Your Honor, my client's schedule will adjust," I said. "Sit down." Fifth, Preston was to write a personal handwritten letter of apology to Margaret Ellison, to Camille Reyes, and to the broader community. The letter had to be reviewed by the court for sincerity before it was considered complete. And finally, because of the comment about the court and his family's influence, I found Preston in contempt. That means I found that he had disrespected the authority of this court in a way that could not be ignored. Bailiff Marcus stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. I watched Preston's face change, finally, completely, as the handcuffs came out. "Preston Harrington III," I said, "you will spend tonight in county holding. You will return before me at 9 a.m. tomorrow for a review hearing. At that time, if you demonstrate that you understand the weight of what happened in this room today, I will release you to begin your obligations. If you do not, we will have a longer conversation." For the first time since he walked in, Preston Harrington III had nothing to say. Marcus let him out. His lawyers followed in a hurry, whispering to each other. The courtroom was very still. I looked at Margaret. She was not celebrating. She was not smiling wide. She just nodded at me, slowly, the way a person does when they have been holding something heavy for a long time and someone finally helps them set it down. I nodded back. 6 months later, I received a report from Delmore Elementary School. Preston Harrington III had completed all 120 hours. The supervising teacher wrote a short note. She said that he had been resistant at first, quiet, uncomfortable. But around week 4, something shifted. A boy in the class, 7 years old, struggling with reading, had started waiting for Preston by the door on Saturday mornings. The boy called him Mr. P. By the final week, Preston had asked the teacher if he could continue coming, voluntarily, once a month. She said yes. He did. I do not tell that part of the story because it makes Preston a hero. He made choices that hurt a good woman, and consequences were right. I tell it because I believe that even in the most arrogant person, there is sometimes something waiting to wake up. It just needs the right room, the right moment, the right truth spoken clearly. That is what this courtroom is for. I still think about Margaret Ellison. I think about the way she walked in with just a rubber band around her papers. No lawyer, no strategy, just her truth and her receipts and 31 years of having done things right. There are people in this world who measure worth in property values and market rates, and there are people who measure it in the children they believed in, the Tuesdays they drove someone to the hospital, the names they still remember decades later. Margaret Ellison knew exactly what she was worth. She just needed a room that agreed. The law at its best is not complicated. It is simply this: no one is worth more than anyone else when they step through that door. Not wealth, not a name, not a family donor history, just the truth. And the truth, in the end, always finds its level. I am Judge Frank Caprio, and I will see you in the next case.